It gone live.
Hello.
Hello, and welcome to the Three Ravens Book Club live stream for our July into August novel, this one.
Uprooted by Naomi Novik, if that's backwards on your screen.
Yes, that's true. I never know. It seems the right way around to us, though.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, what an amazing book. Interesting. I'd be interested to hear if people didn't like it. Had you read it first, or had you read another Naomi Novik book before?
I had read several other Naomi Novik books before that, so I was coming into this book already as a fan of the writer, much like the familiar, I really like Levi Dugo, so I'm coming from a similar position.
Yeah. Okay, so same format as a regular Three Ravens Book Club episode. If you join the live stream and want to leave comments. Oh, Elaine, straight on there. I absolutely loved it. Good. We're in a strong position then, Elaine. So yeah, first question, just throw responses into the chat, is how did you feel about the book? And I'm very happy to start off by saying I felt really inspired by Uprooted. I felt like it was a tremendous take on fairy tales that threw together loads and loads of fairy tale ideas that I love and find interesting anyway, but that it did some beautiful things with them.
Was this your first Naomi Novik book?
No, I had read Spinning Silver beforehand, and it's worth saying that Uprooted came first in terms of Novik's publication history, but Spinning Silver came directly after Uprooted, and
you just read them in the wrong order.
Yeah, I just read them in the wrong order. Not to say that they're sequential books.
No, they're not connected.
But they're very similar books in terms of like their general vibe and theme, in that they're both retellings of Polish folk tales.
Yes, they're rooted in East European folklore, and Novik's, I think she's got heritage, Eastern European heritage, so that's obviously the folklore of her ancestors. She feels very connected to that as a writer, which is great. And yeah, they're similar. They're quest stories with a female central character. They're buildings Roman stories, aren't they? Both of them.
But I think, before she started moving into this new territory, because she's then had that recent trilogy that you've really enjoyed.
Yes, the Deadly Education trilogy, the Scholarmans, I believe they're called.
I've not read any of those yet. I'm waiting for my masters to be finished, and then I'll probably gobble them up. But before that, she was really famous for the Temeraire books, wasn't she?
Which is I think it's a 12 novel sequence actually. The Temeraire books are fantasy, but they are set in a sort of alternative Regency England.
Yeah.
With dragons.
With dragons, yeah. Dragons.
All I need to say about those books are dragons in bonnets.
Dragons in bonnets, yeah.
What more could you want?
So anyway, Uprooted. I mean, how did you feel about this one? Because you were more familiar with Naomi Novik going into this one. How did you feel?
Oh, I love this book. I completely devoured it. It has a lot of tropes that I enjoy in literature.
Yeah.
The characters were very well drawn for me. I like the romance element, which it's not a romance novel per se. I'd say it's a coming of age novel, but the romance is a nice little side order. There's a female friendship in the book, which I thought was great, and I really enjoyed her friend Agnieszka's friendship with Kazia, and how that sort of goes through those twisty places of female jealousy and supporting each other through to distrusting each other, but there's deep love there at the heart of it.
Well, I also think that one of the strengths of the book is it keeps changing. Like, it starts off and you think it's going to be like Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah,
I think that's where the book starts. And then it becomes magic school, which we talked about on the book club before. We enjoy a bit of magic school from time to time, a person learning their skills and being frustrated in their learning. And then I think it opens up into a more complicated story where you've got like courtly intrigue and really the wood as an antagonist, which is a very interesting aspect of the book, I think. It's not often that nature becomes the baddie.
So hostile in a way. And yeah, I mean, normally when we see the wood in growing up stories, or indeed in Jungian psychology, if there's a forest to be traversed, you need to go through it in order to come out of it. it's going to change you in some way. You'll have an experience inside which will change you.
Yeah.
The wood isn't normally the villain of say your subconscious.
That's right. Like, you know,
unusual.
Into the Woods is obviously the like famous musical that sort of responds to all of these fairy tale tropes once they've been thoroughly analyzed. But yeah, there's so many stories about a teenage girl going into the woods and having an experience that then enables her to become a woman. And I think that in this novel, it's not as simple as that. I think it's interesting the way that Novik clearly went, yeah, okay, that is one way to go, and that's the way that a lot of people go, but I'm gonna do something a little bit different. And I thought that was really, really strong.
And it just, well, actually, I mean, to use the metaphor of sort of growing, which is in one of my favorite scenes, and obviously we've got this lovely growing flower on the cover. The novel's kind of like that, though. I think it unfurls more petals, more layers, because you think actually you're going to get quite a straight romance magic school, conquer the naughty wood, but then actually there's a much wider, more complex world of politics and war and the sense of the state without. Is it Russia or Ruska?
Yeah.
Just beyond Polnia, which is this sort of threat, this hostile force, and it just gets bigger and bigger, better and better, really.
It does, but I think the book is also one where it's really about comparisons between things. So it's a book with loads of doubles in, or like points of comparison. So you've got the village and the tower as like an initial kind of comparison point. Then you've got him and her. You've got Kasia and Agnieszka as like doubles. You've got the two states that are at war. You've got the two different queen mothers. So like it's a book where there continues to be opposites or at least points of comparison where you know, like even the dragon and the falcon as these two powerful court wizards, you know, you get these different like dramatic foils is technically the term for
styles of magic, because you've got Agnieszka using the intuitive magic. She's kind of taught herself, but also picked up from Yaga's notebook, versus the highly formal magic that the dragon uses, which he thinks is the only way.
Okay, so I mean that's our kind of general feelings, outpouring of I think general appreciation and love.
Exactly.
And if you just joined the chat, we've just been talking about how did you feel about the book. Second question is, who is this book for? And the question beyond that is, who's your favorite character and why? And so if you want to answer either of those questions or all of those questions and pop responses into the chat, we'll address them in due course.
So the book came out in 2015.
Yeah, 2015, 2016.
For me, 2015 was the point where young adult fiction really spoke to me and connected with me more. I was, I suppose, a young adult. What we're looking at, I was a young adult, so I was probably the target audience for it. And I think there are quite a few books which you could put alongside Uprooted on a shelf which fit into this at the time. I think young adult has changed as a genre now, and the kind of young adult novels we're seeing now are not like this one. And we've also kind of gone into the new adult romantasy genre, which this doesn't fit into.
No,
because it's not a strictly adult novel. It has no explicit content, does it? Of any sort. The romance is very gentle. The violence is minimal / implied, I would say.
You don't get any graphic descriptions of anything.
I think people turning into awful tree people is pretty graphic.
I think what happens with Kasia, what happens with the queen in the wood, like the wood queen, I think like that is a horror story in a way, but it's kind of light horror. But I don't think about it as a young adult in the same way as I would think about like Harry Potter and the Hunger Games being those like big kickoff points.
I think the young adult of that period was a bit more sophisticated than what we're necessarily seeing now as young adults.
Okay, interesting.
Because how old's Agnieszka?
Well, she's sort of coming of age, isn't she?
It's the classic 17.
Is she like 16, 17, 18? I'm not sure if it's stated in the book. It doesn't leap to mind as
and because it's a historical, quasi-historical setting, she could be younger because she's not married.
But her voice is not
voice is not the voice of a 14-year-old.
I mean, if I was going to be critical of the book, which I'm loath to be, I think she speaks and thinks much more like an adult than she does like a child. You know, she's as much as it's theoretically a story of coming of age, as far as I'm concerned, she's already kind of in many regards an adult who who's kind of just waiting for events and circumstances and maybe literal time to pass so that she can class herself as one.
Yes.
I did think, though, that it was interesting, to start the book off with a sympathetic character, i.e. the one who's not the pretty one.
Yes.
Right. It's
and she's the messy one.
Yeah.
I love that about her, the mess that always clings to her. And later we find out it's because, the forest wants to be one with her.
Yeah. But also that, that's the way that she is as a person. And what the book encourages her to do is lean into who she is rather than trying to
change it.
Yeah, not fit into some kind of other.
Even though everyone's always telling her, "Oh, you're always so messy,"
Yeah.
and the dragon is repelled by the fact that stains seem to cling to her every outfit,
and also furious with her for not following the rules, which are, again, like having a rebel protagonist is a very helpful thing.
But I feel like that's an insecurity thing because he's had to follow the rules to get where he is, and the sense that, oh, I could have broken the rules is blinding for this guy.
Well, and I also think that, fair credit to the dragon, like he has been, it seems, on his own, having quite a sad life.
Yeah.
He's absolutely miserable.
Losing a lot of people.
Yeah, losing a lot of people, but managing to maintain control through being very controlled, if you see what I mean. And so to have somebody in or somebody come in who's going to throw chaos at the wall, I can understand why that would be stressful for him. Elaine says she was 17 when she first went to the tower. Right. So, she
kind of mostly an adult.
Yeah, you shouldn't be, as well. It's like, I mean, how many times have we encountered this? The much, much older man.
Yeah. Well, he must be.
Yeah, he is.
Isn't he hundreds of
years
old?
Hundreds of years old.
Yeah, we've got this hundreds of year old relationship.
I mean, I wonder if it's from a lot of particularly female novelists thinking the only way we're going to get a sophisticated bloke
is if he's been alive
for hundreds of years, because someone just being in their 30s, it's not believable that he would be mature enough to deal with.
I love that. It's a very damning reading of men as incredibly immature until you are centuries old.
I think that's probably the message that's coming through.
Martin is actually 906 years old.
Yeah, so only way you'd consider being with me.
Great skincare routine.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I think that's an interesting trope. We keep on encountering it. I didn't feel that uncomfortable about it in this book, in part because,
as I said before, it doesn't bother me.
Well, I think part of why I don't feel uncomfortable about it in this book is because he does leave. He does send her away. He's very resistant to any kind of romantic relationship with her. And I think part of his coldness and part of his strangeness is basically I know it's inappropriate for me to have any sorts of thoughts or feelings.
And of course there's the whole reputation thing, because he gets girls in who have magical ability and who can assist him with his struggle. But when they go back to the village with their wheelbarrow full of gold, their reputation's ruined. So he's got this reputation as this awful seducer, but the village can't turn him down because he's got so much money.
Yeah, well, and power.
And they're scared of him, even though he's trying to protect them. So I guess having that knowledge that you're meant to be the grand seducer is not a very comfortable place to find himself in.
So here's a question then. If you were 12 or 13-year-old girl, would this be the right book for you?
It might be.
Yeah.
Possibly.
As a 12 or 13-year-old boy, as someone who really liked fantasy, I would have adored this book and lapped it up. I'm not sure it's for the average teenage boy.
I would have loved it at that age, but it's for me actually, one of the reasons I like this book so much is it feels like an inheritor from one of my favourite childhood books, which is Dragonsbane by Patricia C. Reed. Absolutely adored that book. Read it cover to cover. Could probably quote you the entire thing. The sequels aren't as good, but the first book is absolutely banging.
It's one of those books that when we're clearing the shelves to look for space to put new books, Eleanor's like, no, it can't go in the loft.
Martin's like, but
right.
it is a children's book. No.
Yeah, exactly. It's staying down.
Off and put Dragonsbane down when you go, sir.
All right then.
I really like dragons, but the heroines are very resourceful. She's very different, and Agnieszka kind of follows in her footsteps, I think. I mean, if you've never read that book, it's probably aimed at 9 to 12, but again, more sophisticated than today's 9 to 12. It's obviously over 30 years old, this book.
So okay, when I think about Harry Potter, I think if you're an adult reading Harry Potter, you're probably going to find it quite a childish read. I know people do like it.
I don't think it has
comfort
challenging enough concepts in it for most adults.
And I think that the Hunger Games actually falls into that trap as well a little bit for me, where I'm going, I'm not that interested in teenagers. And I think what I'm trying to get towards is this book feels like it's got a level of sophistication that goes beyond the average kind of YA or, you know, children into adult transitional novel, where I think actually if you're 13 and reading Uprooted, you're unlikely to get as much from it as an adult who's a bit more literate and versed in fairy tale and fantasy tropes and all those kinds of things that the book is clearly writing in response to. It may be that you've encountered a lot of fairy tales when you're a kid in the same way that you would, you know, being read bedtime stories and things like that. But I don't know. I feel like it's a book that in my head is very like meta literate. It's like tied into traditions.
It is, and that's one of the reasons we enjoy it, because actually you and I are of a similar, if not identical, vintage to the Novik. So a lot of our references and frames of reference are the same.
Yeah, and I think that they're like, if I think about the Earthsea books by Ursula Le Guin, I feel like this fits comfortably alongside it, in that in my mind, this is a modern classic. It has earned its right to be there alongside, you know, The Wizard of Earthsea and all of those wonderful books.
I remember being asked by a young person who really enjoyed the Harry Potter novels, and they were, you know, just exactly sort of right age, 13, 14. What to read now, because I've really enjoyed the Harry Potter novels. I love magic school, I love wizards. And I said, oh, well, the Earthsea novels, and they couldn't get along with them. And there is actually a world of difference. When I returned to Le Guin's work, I thought, oh, okay, this is much more linguistically complex. Well, this has much bigger ideas in it. It's not as kind of mass appeal.
No, and I think the whole point of her world is words are the magic in her magic system. And so it is a very literate book. I would say that, like, maybe my argument for Uprooted might be it's for someone who's read a few fantasy books, right?
So you're familiar with the tropes, you're familiar with how they can be played with and inverted. I mean, that's the fun part of fantasy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is more than many others. It's a tropey genre, and we'd be the first to admit it.
Definitely.
And I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think that's one of the reasons we seek out fantasy, because we like particular tropes done in different and exciting ways.
Yeah. And I think that then when we move on to the favorite character, are you implied to say Agnieszka, she's your favorite?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I really enjoyed her voice. I think it's hard not to have her as a favorite. It's her point of view. It's very much her story.
Yeah, so it's interesting, because I would say the dragon is my favorite character in the book.
Yeah,
and in part
to him, did you?
Well, no, I mean, I didn't feel connected to him. But I thought he's
a lonely man who's trying to fight a battle which is kind of useless, and he feels very on his own until he meets the right person who can help him on his struggle. Did you not feel connected to this character?
Okay, well, maybe in some ways. But I think what I'm trying to get at is, as a male, I mean, he starts off being like the Beast in the Beauty and the Beast story, like this scary male adult presence. I think that he and his reactions to things and the way he acquiesces, changes, softens, like, they're both characters who are on journeys. I think that Agnieszka gets a lot of her self-improvement and development from Yaga, who's like an absent mother kind of character.
Through her diary.
Yeah, and, you know, when we talk about female tropes, it's that maiden, mother, crone journey that most female protagonists go on, that female triptych. And, you know, she's learning from some previous mothery type, crony type. It's mostly crones, actually, I think. Mostly learning from crone types, which is the traditional kind of fantasy journey, to inform how she's going to grow up and become a potential mother. I think for the dragon, he's a really interesting character in the way that he is already theoretically that wise wizard at the end of his life.
Although he's entered, when we meet him at the start of the novel, he's entered that period which we talk about with a lot of these much older men.
Yes.
Stagnation.
Yeah, exactly.
He's stuck in a rut, isn't he? And he needs somebody to wake him up out of it.
That's
dash some cold water on his face.
But theoretically, he's a master, right? And he's in that kind of period of calcification where he's like, I know what I'm doing. And in the same way as like a Merlin or whatever, he's got fatal flaws, his being, rigidity. And I think what's nice about this book from that perspective and about the dragon as a character is it's about how he's broken out of his fixed systems. And, is it every year he takes on a new girl? I can't remember what the exact rotation is.
1 year, it might be 3 or 5.
Yeah,
Does
whatever.
anyone else remember?
But in terms of the journey that he's on, he's literally repeating himself over and over again. Yeah. And I think that at the end of the book, he retreats from her and is like, okay, I have been changed, but I'm not gonna be a magic-y boyfriend and come up and be like, I'm going to seduce you or whatever. At the end of the novel,
wait for her to come to me.
Exactly. Like he comes to collect his taxes or whatever, and she's there, and there's a kind of knowing moment where she has seen him, and that's where the book ends, because it's like, and you can imagine what happens next. But I, as Agnieszka, have made my feelings very clear about what I'd like to happen. Every 10 years, Elaine. Thank you, Elaine. You are saving the day here. Alosha, as a character, another brilliant character. I think that she's absolutely wonderful. I loved the hints at the world of other wizards outside, like the Falcon.
What's the guy rostered for the Magnificent?
Yeah, well, the one who was like the jeweler, who's like, I think that's Alosha's grandson in the book. You've got
the sword.
Yeah, she's the sword. You've got the owl as well. I liked that there were these other mages out there. That again made me think of Earthsea.
Yeah, I mean, you could easily write another book in this world, not necessarily a direct sequel, but she could use this world again.
Oh, easily,
it's very richly drawn. It will be easy for her. Well, not easy, but she could.
Yeah, and I think that. I mean, I went back and looked at a number of the reviews that had come out when Uprooted was published. Because it was nominated for the Hugo, but it didn't win, which I think is probably criminal. I didn't actually look up what won the 2016 Hugo, but anyway, I think that one of the things that people said about the book is there's like a trilogy of plots in this book. It doesn't feel like it's overstuffed, but she goes through a lot of story and just like whips.
She does. Well, I was flicking just to remind myself of a couple of character names.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize how quickly the thing with Kasia takes place.
Yeah.
Like the initial problem where Kasia goes into the wood and she obviously is attacked and Agnieszka has to save her. That's so early on.
Yeah,
it's like 4 chapters in or something.
Yeah, it doesn't happen late.
Blimey, it does not mess about.
But also, what a cool power to have, like, to be wood. Yeah, it's really great. Okay, so Alosha, I think a great character. I think it's always nice to have a woman from whom to learn, and a woman who's obviously been scarred and who's tough. I love the idea when you encounter female warriors, like really strong women who are great at killing people. I think is wonderful. I don't know if you have ever read, it's Bloody Rose is the sequel. The first one's called The Band. Wonderful book. Again, strong female characters. And the Christopher Buhlman.
The Black Tongue Thief.
The Black Tongue Thief and the Daughter's War. Yeah, great female warrior characters. Love those.
I can't take the that book you just mentioned seriously, because whenever I see it, I always read it as Bloody Rose.
Yeah.
She's so annoying.
It's a great, very fun, silly book. But in that one, the main character in the first book, his skill in their party of warriors is the shield.
Yeah.
And all he's good at is blocking things and taking hits for the team. And it's a wonderful, like, Kasia is that slightly similar character. Well, it's not just the tank, but it's like the expectation is not that you'll be dealing loads of damage. just you absorb
Just
the
absorb
damage.
the
Yeah, and I
damage.
think that that's obviously like there's a stoicism to that I think is appealing in a character as well. So, and if you've recently joined the chat, the conversation we're having is we've talked about so far, and do feel free to contribute. How did you feel about the book? Who is this book for? Who's your favorite character and why? We're now going to talk about favorite scene and why. And then the question after that, if you would like to address that one, is folkiness, history, and magic. Thoughts? Which it's my favorite.
Big collection of ideas rather than a question.
Yeah, but it's my favorite one that we have on our list of repeated questions. So favorite scene and why for you?
So my favorite scene, I was just thinking about this and I realized it's the same favorite scene as my favorite scene in The Familiar.
Okay.
Tropes done differently. What can I say? I'm not even going to apologize. It's when they merge their magic in the library and they grow the flowers, and it is beautiful. And you can see them working together, coming together for the first time. That's my favorite.
Yeah, it's gorgeous, isn't it? I mean, the description of that is lovely, and yeah, I think thematically, obviously, as well as visually, in terms of its imagery, it works really, really well. My favorite scene, I think, is when the evil queen's attacking the tower. And they're doing everything they possibly can to like build trenches and walls, and the children are in danger, and everything is happening that's really very scary.
And they're pulling out all the stops of the magic and trying to come up with fresh ideas all the time.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely wonderful. So I really like that as a battle. I felt like it was a really imaginative and interesting battle.
And I'm not always crazy on written battle scenes.
No,
they can be great, but no, that was enough entertainment, wasn't it?
It was brilliant. And I think the probably close second for me is where, fairly well at the end of the book, but kind of at that kind of climax, denouement switch, the reversal, I guess you'd call it, where Agnieszka is absorbed into the wood and sees what the Wood Queen's experiences have been, and she has that moment of like revelation and understanding. I thought that again was very beautifully written. It was like poetic in terms of its prose. I thought that was really sensitive and quite like she's dealing with some quite complicated stuff, because that is original. Like, you're talking about tropes a moment ago. We're talking about stock characters and how they're toyed with. Like, if you're going to do all of that, why are you doing it? You've got to deliver something original.
Yes.
At a certain point. And that, I think, really is the original part of the book, is this idea of, the woods being forced to defend themselves against
the woods consciousness,
against humanity. And there's a bit of Isengard and the Lord of the Rings, and the Ents and the mustering of the Ents and everything from the second Lord of the Rings book, The Two Towers. But I think it's actually the transition that takes place between it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I think rather than it being a war ending and a like beating up of a baddie, it's a empathy, sympathy, coming to understand a person ending. And I think that notion that the bitterness and rage, the desire for revenge, self-protection, all of those kinds of things, it's not all finished when the book ends.
No, you get the sense there is work to do, and she's going to keep doing it.
Yeah, she's going to keep doing it. They're going to keep fixing the wood. They're going to keep trying to make it better. And so there is an eco theme.
Yeah,
that runs.
Very, very soft.
Yeah, it's a soft eco theme, but the Lord of the Rings is the same, I'd suggest. It's like this idea of like, if you hack down the woods and treat the woods badly, the woods
are going to come after you.
Yeah, nature is going to respond.
Can we call this Cli-Fi?
No, we can't. And Cli-Fi, in case we haven't spoken about this with you before, is a term that I encountered in my master's degree about climate fiction.
Yeah, Cli-Fi.
Which is known in academic circles as Cli-Fi, which makes me kind of break out in hives. I don't like it. Cli-Fi. Anyway, Elaine, favorite scene is when Sarkhan and Agnieszka take on the Wood Queen in the woods after the battle. Yeah, I think it's wonderful because it starts off one way and you think it might go one way, but actually I think the way that it resolves is more sophisticated and complicated and messy, actually. And I think I like the mess.
Yes, Agnieszka's a messy heroine for a messy time.
Very true. Yeah, so I love that. Okay, that brings us on to folkiness, history, and magic. Thoughts?
How about rephrase that question?
No, I refuse.
Do not. Okay.
In the same way that I can't put Dragonsbane in the attic, even though you're never going to read it again.
That's not true.
We're not changing this
I will
question.
read it again.
Okay. So folkiness, history, and magic. Let's start with folkiness. I mean, how do you feel about the folkiness in this book?
Yeah, good, strong folkiness.
Yeah.
Village, isolated rural community, threat without, natural world, whether for better or worse, animal rating high, folk magic, quite literally. I mean, she is remembering things half told to her, doing what feels intuitive, building on the work of Baba Yaga, a folkloric figure.
Yep. Not only that, but I would say things like harvest, the cycles that
of
they're
life.
in.
I mean, even the dragon's 10-year reaping of the maiden is a cycle within this context.
And when she's healing him, the song she sings, for example, like that's based in, I think it's the traditional Polish version of Happy Birthday, basically, but it's like the song of saying I wish you would live for longer, you know.
And there's lots of Polish language in the book.
There is,
and reference it that the world feels very well built in terms of a folky world, like what the characters are doing, how they're conducting their activities. She does a lot of cleaning in the first 3 chapters of the book, and the tools and the method she uses to clean are very folky.
But also I think that idea of like how rumors about people escalate, and you know, you've heard this about the dragon, and therefore everybody fears him.
He's a folkloric figure within the folkloric world.
That's right. And then likewise the court and the queens and, you know, all of these different wizards or whatever, they all have their own kind of stories that, you know, if you're interested in folklore and interested in fantasy fiction, then you recognize all of that stuff.
Recurring tale types.
Yeah, it does.
Just the setup with its, oh, I'm going to be Beauty and the Beast, Tiger's Bride. Oh, no, I'm not.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that it's really clever in how it uses folklore and all that kind of folky backdrop and all of those concepts to springboard to do something that's a little bit different and original, which I just think is wonderful. How about history in the book?
I don't think it's relevant. I mean, the folkiness, I suppose, what I've just talked about with tools, methods, ways of spending time. Sure, historical, but what's my period? It's non-specific.
It's
non-specific historical.
Kind of
I couldn't tell
Renaissance fantasy, maybe medieval Renaissance kind of.
I think Renaissance probably because of the technology available, and some of the descriptions of the clothes the dragon gets her in feel more Renaissance.
Yeah, so but it's high fantasy, we would generally call it.
There is no real world.
I think though that the book does do a good job of creating a believable context, by which I mean that what's happening in the novel makes it feel like there is a history to the world.
Yes, you had a sense of this ancient conflict with the next country, for example. The politics are just twisty enough that you get the sense they've been there for a while. Definitely.
And so I think, you know, we were alluding or mentioning earlier, you could write sequels in this world.
And in a way, Spinning Silver is not the exact same world, but it could be the next country.
Yeah,
it could take place just over the border at the same time.
Yeah, a few countries over because it's colder.
Much colder. Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. The same world in a literal sense, like the same globe. But I do think that it would be interesting to see what the future feels like when Agnieszka's reached the point that Alosha has got to. Like, that's the book I'd like to read, if you know what I mean, where she's been around for long enough to have had
she's Yaga.
generations of children. Maybe not Yaga and gone, but maybe
she's in her Yaga era.
Yeah, she's in her crone stage or what have you. You know, I think that would be really interesting. I assumed it would be 16th century Poland and Russia, but I don't know why I assumed that. Yeah,
I think that's bang on.
I think that is.
I think that those are the cues we're given, aren't we, to get that
in terms of dress, in terms of technology, in terms of armor, all that kind of technology that's in there, aside from the magic, feels like it's Tudor.
But folk magic of
terms
the
of English.
16th century, it was wrapped up in healing and herbalism,
Yes.
so it fits in with that too.
Yeah, and I'm glad that it isn't a book that ventures into airships and steampunky type of things and hot air balloons. Like I feel like if you're releasing your book at this point in time, well, you say that, but you know, you really like Northern Lights and
that's true.
His Dark Materials.
Absolutely, that's full of Zeppelin.
Stuff's all in there. So, you know, I think that it depends on how well it's handled. Eleanor has a bit of an aversion to steampunk, if that has never come out. Go on. What do you say about steampunk?
I just don't get it. I think that's what it is. I just don't get it. It just seems to be, it's an aesthetic rather than a proper world. It's just people coming on with goggles on their heads as if to imply they have just parked their Zeppelin over there and got off it. But for why? Cogs on everything. Why? Doesn't it work? It's not good enough. Basically, that's my problem with it. I need better.
You need more.
And Northern Lights is a perfect. I mean, it's not steampunk. It's set. I mean,
it's not set in the Victorian era. That's the key thing. Like steampunk is about coal power.
Northern Lights is closer to sort of the 20s, 30s, isn't it?
Yeah.
Although it's not set. It's set in a parallel world anyway.
No, but it's set pre-World War One.
Yes,
I think.
But, I mean, Lyra's Oxford is
in
not
a fantasy world.
The modern world's Oxford.
No.
Yeah, and like our world is Will's world.
Yeah, that's right.
She's in a parallel universe.
Anyway,
no, you're absolutely right. I really like it, and it's full of airships.
Yeah. Magic, though, that we can talk about a bit. Magic in Uprooted, immaculately done.
We get the best of both worlds, don't we?
Yeah.
We get a really well-explored formal system of magic as typified by Sarkhan, and then we get the fun chaos nature magic of Agnieszka.
Yeah, and we also get different flavors of magic, like the Falcon's magic theoretically being about far-seeing or like looking at consequences and how like predictive magic almost in a way. Then you've got Alosha. I love the idea that Alosha's grandson's specialist area of magic is just making pretty things.
Yeah.
Like making magic jewelry and gems.
They're not even really magic, are they? They're just...
do
they do something?
I'm not sure, but I think they maybe can. But this is, I think that it's this world that you're given the indications of, where it takes you 7 years to qualify as if you're becoming a doctor or something. And I think that that's really cool. That idea of formal training, and that actually she can skip her formal training and get the qualification because she's evidently got the skills to do what's necessary, even if it sort of comes out of her in an almost accidental way. It's a really interesting character, and I like the way that she is so distinct from everybody else.
It's trust your gut magic, isn't it?
It
feels right, so I'm going to go with it.
Yeah. So I think that all of that is done really, really well. And I think that's part of why, in a way, I would like to read more in this universe.
Yeah.
To see whether and how that moves forward and how it develops and changes over time. Now, in terms of next questions, they are thoughts on the writer's style. Was it appropriate? And the one following that is, what did you think of the plot/storytelling? And if you've just joined the chat and would like to answer or respond to any of the questions that we're chatting about, so far we've talked about, how did you feel about the book? Who was this book for? Favorite character and why? Favorite scene and why? And then folkiness, history, and magic. Thoughts? That's what we've just been talking about. So, thoughts on the writer's style. Was it appropriate?
Yes, I think it's important to have a first-person perspective for this character in this world. So, yes, I do think that was ideal.
Do you think that the book could have benefited from shifting out of Agnieszka's head?
No. I can go either way on doing that.
Yeah.
I am once I'm into a character's thought processes, I can sometimes find it a little bit jarring to have a sudden shift.
Yeah.
Not every time, but sometimes. And I don't think the book would have necessarily benefited from seeing Sarkhan's perspective, because we get to see him as she discovers him.
And I also think it enables us to project onto him in the same way that the villagers do, and then the same way that Agnieszka does a little bit. I think it also allows us to judge Agnieszka's choices in a way that maybe we wouldn't have been so clearly able to if we'd shifted around between the wider cast.
Yeah.
I think maybe. But I
think she does a good enough job of telling us what other characters think of Agnieszka without having to see it from their perspective.
I think that's very true. I think that it also helps it become a much more readable and pacey book, in that you are very invested in her. She starts in a bad way, and actually it gets worse before it gets better. And I think that her messiness and the sense of her kind of lack of confidence and not knowing what she's doing and all the rest of it early on set you up really nicely for almost like the twist of the book, which is embrace that feeling that you don't know what's going on and use that energy and that nervousness to manifest what it is you need in a given moment. So be intuitive.
She's also incredibly active. She's not a passive character. When she hears there's problems in the village, straight away she's out. She's transforming her dress into something ridiculous and going and sorting it all out. She doesn't just sit down and let things happen. She's like, no, we're going to find a way to fix it. Oh, your friend's come back from the woods. She's a tree. We have to kill her now. No, we're going to fix that. And she does. And so it's good to be along with her for the ride.
Yeah, definitely.
She's not passive, I don't think, at any point, really, is she?
No, she doesn't take a backseat. I mean, the only thing she initially does is when she first arrives at the tower, when you were talking about having cleaning montage, like that happens fairly early on. But most of the time she's defying other people's advice, which I think is always quite pleasing to encounter. Like we were talking about earlier, the rebel is a great archetype to be working with.
Just gets on.
In terms of Novik's style itself, I think it's really strong in this book. Like I loved Spinning Silver. I think it's a really good book. And like I said at the start of the chat, I read Spinning Silver first and then read Uprooted. And I actually felt like her writing in Uprooted was more stylish than her writing in Spinning Silver. Personally, that's just me.
Maybe that's to do with the character, because Agnieszka is very connected to nature.
Yes.
And like the visual poetry of the world around her. Can't remember the name of the
off the top of my
main
head,
character in Spinning Silver, but she's way more material. She's really practical. She's focused on solving her problems in practical ways.
Yeah.
I mean, they're similar in that they're both determined, but I think she's got a different worldview, hasn't she?
Oh, definitely.
Based on her experience. So perhaps because we see through her eyes, it's less poetic.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And I think that in terms of style, it is appropriate. Like, I love that book. And I would say they're both as good as each other.
Yeah.
I don't want to, be down on Spinning Silver at all. But I think that Uprooted is a more beautiful book. And I like the way that music is brought in. And I like the lushness of the descriptions. And I think when Spinning Silver is at its most magnificent as a book, it's when the magic is starting to kind of burst out of things, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Like, her world is a brutal world, and then when you see magical things, they make a very deep impression on you in that world. It's got a I think almost Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe type of quality, Spinning Silver, whereas Uprooted, I think you're right in terms of the nature imagery does lend itself to kind of beautiful poetic descriptions, and I also think that having a very earthy, muddy, agrarian setting for most of the book also helps to strengthen it in terms of its writing style. Okay, what did you think of the plot and storytelling then? Do you have any criticisms or things that you didn't think were as robust? I mean, having read this several years ago and thinking about it now, are there parts of it that dropped out of your memory that maybe weren't as resonant or that didn't stick with you? Do you know what I mean?
The Act 3 visit to the court probably didn't stay with me as much.
Yeah.
I remembered them coming away again and engaging in the war, but the actual being in the court probably hadn't stayed
Yeah.
quite as firmly in my brain. So maybe that's
I found that bit reminiscent of horror stories and ghost stories that you hear from Eastern Europe about, like that story of the clockwork soldier, where the clockwork soldier is brought to court by the amazing watchmaker, and all the women want to dance with him. So a tremendously creepy story. And I felt like this idea of the king or prince projecting onto his mother the idea that she's cured, the idea that she's better, wanting to use like propaganda and all of that. Like, I found that deeply disturbing as an idea. And when she increasingly goes mad and that infection and wrath spreads, like that, I do remember about Uprooted. I'm surprised in a way at how well I recalled the book. What I forgot was the names. I'm terrible.
Yes.
At remembering names.
That was an easy look up.
Yeah,
and it's not oversaturated with characters, actually. It's not one of these books that requires a cast list at the front.
No.
There are a few central characters, so it is easier to remember them.
Yeah.
Sometimes, fantasy in particular and sci-fi as well suffer from this kind of 4 pages of character names, and you think, oh my god.
Yeah.
And I do need to refer to it because I've forgotten who this guy is.
Yeah. I thought she nailed the plot and storytelling. It all flowed really well. Agreed. I mean, I think it is a really cleverly structured book. And I think it is a book that obeys like the 5-act structure, typical dramatic arc, really, really well. And I think that she, Novik here, messes with enough stuff that you almost want to have that firm foundation.
You've got the formality, a little bit like you've got the formality of the dragon's magic, and Agnieszka messing around all over it.
But that is what's going on.
That's kind of what
goes
on with the plot. Though,
yeah, it is.
Clever.
It's fixed and follows a steady path. It doesn't feel like it's steady necessarily.
No, but it's actually, it observes the formalities.
Yeah, so I think it's really clever. Okay. Next, does the book have clear themes and were they handled well?
Yes. What would you say is the central theme of the book?
I think that the book is about growth. But it's maybe the most obvious thing to say, but when you're talking about nature and growing and growing up, yes, but also no matter what stage of life you're at, when you've got to change and you've got to shift and you've got to grow and you've got to mature, it's always messy.
Yeah.
It's never tick the box, complete the spreadsheet, move on in a nice, sensible way. There's always going to be a certain chaos element, some mud on the dress. And when you look at nature and organic models for growth, very few things are straight. Almost everything is winky wonky and
it was
weird.
By William the Conqueror.
Yeah, but when things organically grow and change, they have to adapt to circumstances, and very rarely is that in a straight line. And so I think the book is about how, as much as you want to, or people may want to, label things and allocate them and fit them into boxes, you're almost always wrong.
Yes.
When you do that. And although maybe there is an argument to suggest that like letting everything go with the flow is not going to lead you to happiness. No, a certain amount of
structure is also helpful.
That's it. Like, you need the tower from time to time. Like, it has, you have to have that structure. There has to be some kind of discipline and a certain amount of suffering, I think. But nonetheless, I think that the book is encouraging people to think you do need to rebel. Everybody needs to rebel. You need to kind of know what you're rebelling for or against to a certain extent. Sometimes it's good to just go with your feelings, but I think that's the main theme I would draw out of the book. I mean, there are other themes that you think that are latent in there.
Self-discovery is part of growth, though, isn't it? I think all of them are probably offshoots from that larger theme, mostly.
Here's a question. Do you think that femininity, gender, sex in the kind of genomic sense rather than in the kind of, literal like acts of reproduction kind of way. But do you think that femininity is an important theme in this book? Because there are many, 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 many female characters in it.
I don't think femininity in and of itself is an important theme in the book, actually. I mean, her magic is feminine because she's doing it.
Yeah.
But beyond that, is it feminine because it is connected to nature a bit more? But his magic's not unconnected to nature. It's just different in the way he handles it. Could she have been a boy? Yes, absolutely.
I think it would have massively changed the book if she'd been a boy. And I'm going to say that because almost all of the characters that she encounters that change her are women. And so she goes through this adventure. I mean, yes, obviously her relationship with the dragon is important, but it's by comparing herself to all of these other women.
Friend, to the older lady, to the wood queen, to the weird queen.
Yeah, exactly. Alosha, like, all of these different models of like. Yeah.
That was another. I think that's it.
All of the examples of womanhood that she meets, and Yaga through the diary entries, and the ghosts of these girls, or like their presences at least, with the notes and the
notes and the things left behind.
Like it's the sense of, I am a young woman who is becoming a woman, and there are older women, there are previous models that there have been. How much do I want to adhere to those models? How much do I want to learn from them? How do I compare to them? I think if you were going to gender flip Agnieszka to become a male character, I think then you would probably want him to be at least learning from some men.
Probably,
if not all.
Yes. I don't think that should happen.
No.
But could it happen? I think yes.
It could, but I think you'd have to radically change the book, because I personally do think it's about a feminine notion of growth and change.
And I mean, would she have been the same with Kazia, her friend, if they'd both been boys? I don't know. Necessarily. I think it's a well-drawn female friendship in all its intricacies.
Yeah, it's one of the first things you said you liked about the book, in fact, when we started the stream. I think that it is, in a way, and this might seem like a big sweeping generalization, and I might be wrong. I'm totally happy to be wrong. But I think that in a way what Novik is sort of getting at, in a way that may not be necessarily politically popular or correct in these times where gender and ideas of them are going through such radical and public transitions. But I think that she might be saying that in a kind of feminist way, there is space for all types of women. And this feminine aspect of thinking and acting and growth and response and going with the flow and intuition needs to be regarded with as much respect as the traditional male structured way of thinking and being and learning.
Yes.
And so I think that actually it's a low-key traditional feminist book.
And harking back to the folkiness, I mean, a lot of folk traditions and folk healing in particular is women's magic or women's medicine, because women weren't allowed to go to university to formally study medicine and join the Society of Physicians and Apothecaries. So, yes, I think she's naturally connected to that because of the context.
Yeah, so I do think that's a theme. And in terms of other themes that I would draw out, I would probably talk a little bit about forgiveness.
Yes.
Because I think that is that's where the novel ends up landing. Like that's part of its story at the end, is about, revenge versus forgiveness. And if I were to be a little bit critical of the book, I might say that it doesn't establish those themes terribly well early on.
No, I mean, she kind of forgives her own mother, doesn't she? She has an uneasy relationship with her own mother.
That's true.
And that, is that resolved? Yeah, kind of.
Well, but I think in the same way, the final problem of the book in the Wood Queen and all the rest is, is it
resolved?
So maybe that's part of her point, is that it's not that simple to get over those kind of grievances and revenge type problems in the same way that
bitterness that lingers.
Well, that Poland-Russia tension, which is the again like meta threat or problem. Maybe that's part of what she's getting at, is that it isn't so easy when you've got a deep-rooted, again using the nature metaphor here, deep-rooted problem. You can't just pull it out and suddenly have a happy flower bed again. You know, it's a bit more complicated than that. So yeah, I'd say that's another theme. Okay. Now, we're coming to the end of our chat, and if anybody does want to have any other contributions, do please chuck them in. How did you feel about the book? Who is this book for? Favorite character and why? Favorite scene and why? Folkiness, history, and magic. Thoughts on the writer's style. Was it appropriate? What did you think of the plot/storytelling? And does the book have clear themes that were handled well? But what we're moving on now to is Raven's ratings. So have a little ponder, slap them in the box and give Uprooted a rating, please.
Yes, so that will be 0, empty nest, no ravens whatsoever, right up to 3 glossy black ravens, a full nest. You absolutely loved it.
Absolutely. And while we're there, let's have a little muse. Hopefully we'll get some fun responses. Is Agnieszka a good role model? What do you think?
In some ways, yes. I do think so.
Go on.
She is a good and loyal friend. If she's going to fight your corner, she's got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would rely on her as a friend.
Mm.
She's true to herself, isn't she?
Yeah.
She doesn't really try to change herself.
No.
I mean, she has sort of a few cursory goes at being clean, but gives it up for a bad job because it's never going to work out. And I think that's good. It's good to see a character who can go her own way and isn't cowed by the pressures put on her by others.
Yeah.
I find, personally, for me, she's a good role model because she's active. I find heroines, or heroes indeed, who will just charge in and get on with things to be aspirational.
Yeah.
So I like reading those kind of characters. I think, yes, a good role model. Where is she a bad role model, would you say? What's she less positive?
So my question would be, can other people base their kind of character personality traits? Can you take lessons from her for yourself? And I think one of the big things that she learns is she needs to trust herself, which is handy because she has a good heart, moral judgment. Yes. She's not operating under, she's not been misguided by trauma or bad dogma or what have you.
But she is so spontaneous, isn't she? And I think something she picks up from the dragon is sometimes we actually need to be a bit more cautious, take a step back, regroup, and then we'll go. We're not just going to go charging in.
Yeah, that's it. So I think that, yes, she is a good role model. I think she's someone you can learn from, but I also would be slightly hesitant about people using her as a model for how you should go about your own life. I think that would be very dangerous.
You wouldn't have a very clean kitchen.
And then, if we flip that to the other side, how do you feel about the dragon?
I think he obviously has a good heart. His motivations all come from the right place. He's been alive for a very long time, so his feelings are somewhat soured, I think. And he feels like he's been used, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Like people rely on him, but he doesn't get a whole lot out of it. And he's in this very lonely place.
I think he operates in an interesting place because people hate him. Like he's a hated figure.
But he is working his socks off night and day, so the same people who hate him don't die.
Yeah, exactly. So I think he's a very interesting character.
Martyr.
And one who kind of reveals himself across the course of the book in a way that I consider to be really pleasing. I don't think he's there to be learned from. I think that he's supposed to be seen as a familiar kind of character, one who maybe does just need to open up a little bit. And I think that's primarily what you learn about him. But, I'm going to return to something you said earlier. Do you think Uprooted is a love story?
No, No, I don't. I think it's a coming of age story that has a love element.
Yeah.
A romance element, let's say.
I
don't know if they're in love. It has a romance element.
Yeah, I think that they're probably more likely to be friends.
Yeah.
With
I think there is that
a little bit of sidebar
of okay, here's my first crush, and this is all very exciting, and I have feelings, and we've melded our magic. Oh boy! But are they for the long haul? Yes, as friends. Maybe not as passion of the century.
It's an interesting one to imagine, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a buildings Roman with a bit of kissing.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so it gets all the ravens, Elaine says.
Yay!
I mean, from my perspective, it's a 3 ravens.
I'm going to give it all the ravens too.
Yeah, so it's a 3 ravens out of 3 book, Uprooted. It's an absolute banging classic,
it's just enjoyable from cover to cover.
Yeah.
There's lots to enjoy in it, and you can read it. I could happily read it again.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But I think that
I don't often reread books because there's only so much time, and there are so many books. But I would happily reread that one.
But I think if you enjoyed it and you've not read Spinning Silver, I would really recommend Spinning Silver.
Just do my sneaky look in the cover and see what else we've got. I think we've mentioned all of her novels there.
Yeah, I've not read any of the Temeraire books, but I think that they skew a bit younger.
All the Temeraire books. There's a lot of them.
Yeah, but,
I think there's 12.
But after that, she's
we've got Spinning Silver and the Scholomance trilogy.
And the reason that I'm going to gobble up the Scholomance books in due course, but part of the reason that I've not leapt on them already is I'm not sure I want to go back to magic school again.
No, but again, it's different.
It's different. Yeah. Well, she's clever, isn't she, Naomi Novik? And she's got a new collection coming out, I think, next month. It might be in October, but I do know that she's doing, if you're in the UK, some signings at Forbidden Planet next month.
You should go meet her.
So if you'd like to go meet Naomi Novik,
she
will be there in London. So there you go. Thank you so much, Elaine, for joining us and having such a lovely chat. I don't think the romance added anything to the story. That's an interesting take. Yeah, I think it's more about growth. That's my personal thing. And sometimes you grow through romance, don't you?
Well, you grow through kissing some people that might not be the right people.
Yeah.
Especially when you're a teenager.
That's very true. Yeah. And next month's book is T. Kingfisher's
A Sorceress Comes to Call.
A Sorceress Comes to Call. It won the vote on Patreon. So let's all, because it's a brand new book, we need to get on and order it and read it.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I know. It's exciting though, isn't it?
Yes. Will the library even have it?
I don't know. Probably, but I think we might end up with a copy because it looks rather good. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you enjoy next month's 3 Ravens Book Club pick. And any thoughts and feedback, as ever, please send them through to 3ravenspodcast@gmail.com. Tomorrow, if you're a Patreon supporter, new listener episode.
Yes, so we've compiled a selection of local law listener stories, some recipes that people have sent in through to us, and that new episode is out tomorrow on Patreon and for everybody else on Monday.
But in terms of the other big event that's happening tomorrow, we are live, 3 Ravens live at Battle Folk and Fable Festival. Yes. So if you can come along, do come along. It's going to be fun.
We're doing a special episode which focuses on some of the strange and silly lore of Sussex, and then Martin will be telling his take on the tale of William the Conqueror.
Yes, I will.
And there's a little bit of music too.
And it's silly, very silly. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Thanks so much.
Good night.
And speak to you soon. Bye-bye.